Hey guys, it's Jay. Welcome back to the Ground Up channel. Today we're going to be talking about the correlation between MBTI and Enneagram and how the Enneagram actually ties into Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So let's get into it. First things first, in order to talk about these things, we must talk about what each one what it represents. So for MBTI, what it comes down to is the wiring of a person, and the way that they're wired is sort of their predisposition or how they come into the world by nature. Now, if you were to take a look at Enneagram, Enneagram is talking about the motivation of a person. And so we have to take these two things and separate them in order to get to the point of how these two things can correlate to one another. So when we talk about MBTI, when we mention wiring, we're talking about the wiring and the cognitive functions of the individual. Each person, according to MBTI and according to the theories of Carl Jung, each person has a predisposition towards certain behaviors over others. Those are what are considered to be our cognitive functions, how we operate as people. How I see it is this: you can think of society as like a hive. Everybody has different functions or predispositions in which they're born with. They're able to do certain things that other people cannot by nature. When talking about Enneagram, we're mentioning the motivation of a person. And what is the best way to determine the motivation of a person? Well, that would be by understanding their needs. And there's nothing better when it comes to understanding a person's needs than using the chart, which is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So if we were to look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, what we would notice is that it's broken down into three main parts, and then it has 5 subparts. Now, let's compare this to the Enneagram. The Enneagram also has 3 separate parts, 3 main parts, and then, but it has 9 different categories within that. So, how do these two things correlate to one another? They both determine the motivation of a person. And if you were to look at each different category, they could correlate to the category within the other system. So for example, you have the heart center in the Enneagram. And in the heart center, you have 3 different Enneagram types: 2, 3, and 4. And so if you were to look at the motivation of one of these Enneagram types within a heart center, you'd realize that the motivation is based off of the need for love and attention. Well, if you were to look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you would see that that is one of the main categories in the 3 categories that it has. It's within the psychological needs under love and affection. So how does this all tie into MBTI? Well, there is a belief that if you have a dominant function, whatever dominant function you may have, that will solely determine your Enneagram type. However, I disagree. Here's why. For every single person, we all require all of the needs within Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You may have a certain default in which you pay attention to because that is your main cognitive functions. For example, any user may focus by default on freedom. However, whenever you determine a person's motivation is not solely based on themselves and what's going on internally, but it's also based on outside factors that are affecting them. So if you have a certain need for freedom and you can't acquire that, well then, what is the reason? It may be because there's something in opposition towards you, forcing you to not have that freedom. So what happens is that person has to develop the motivation of a person who would be willing to fight back, to challenge the opposing force, stopping them from having the freedom. And there are other factors that come into play. You may have a default setting for paying attention to freedom. However, in reality, safety may be your biggest threat. And so, by defining it this way, we can understand that a person may naturally have a predisposition towards focusing on a certain motivation, but then when you interact with your environment, you're changing what your main motivation would be. Enneagram is about not just your motivation, but also your story. These stories can be explained because a person has these needs in their lives. Furthermore, it is my belief that in the earliest stages of your development is whenever you establish your Enneagram. It's not the same as the MBTI type, which is something that is predisposed, something that a person is naturally gifted with. And this goes along with the tri-types. If you look at the tri-type, this would be the best example of a person's story coming to fruition. It's the best way of understanding a person's life beginning. That's everything, and if you guys like this channel, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Everybody stay safe.